Some of the deepest wounds are not created by enemies. They are created in rooms where love is spoken loudly but felt rarely. In homes where protection is promised, yet fear quietly governs every decision. Where care arrives with expectations attached and silence is praised more than truth. These wounds are difficult to name because they were delivered with smiles, advice, and the language of concern. And so the mind learns a dangerous lesson early in life. If it hurts, it must be love. There comes a moment, often in quiet adulthood, when the heart begins to feel tired for no clear reason. Not tired from effort, but from carrying emotions that were never allowed to breathe. You start to realize that the weight you carry did not come from the world outside, but from inside the walls that were meant to shelter you. The guidance you followed felt less like direction and more like confinement. The love you were taught to honor asked you to shrink, to hesitate, to doubt your own instincts. This is not a speech against family. It is a speech for awareness, because not every raised voice is cruelty, and not every gentle word is kindness. Some control whispers, some fear hides behind concern, and some bonds, when examined honestly, are built on obligation rather than connection. Recognizing this does not make you ungrateful. It makes you conscious. Tonight is not about rebellion. It is about clarity, about learning to separate love from fear, guidance from control, care from ownership. Because real love does not demand your silence to survive. Real love does not weaken your spirit to keep its authority. And the moment you see the difference, clearly, calmly, without hatred, is the moment the spell begins to break. When love feels heavy instead of safe, there is a silent confusion that begins very early in life, long before a person has the words to explain it. It happens when love does not feel like rest, but like responsibility. When being cared for does not feel calming, but watchful. In such environments, affection is present, yet safety is absent. You are fed, guided, corrected, advised, but rarely understood. And because this happens under the banner of family, the mind learns to normalize discomfort. It learns to call tension, care, pressure, guidance, and fear protection. This is where the weight begins, not as pain, but as heaviness. A heaviness that settles into the chest and stays there quietly for years. When love is healthy, it expands you. It gives you room to breathe, to make mistakes, to ask questions, to be uncertain. But when love is disguised as control, it does the opposite. It tightens, it watches, it corrects too quickly. It reminds you, subtly or openly, that your choices must pass through approval before they are valid. Over time, you stop trusting your own instincts. You begin to pause before speaking, hesitate before deciding, and doubt before acting. Not because you are weak, but because you were trained to associate independence with risk. The message was never said directly, yet it was repeated in 1,000 small ways. You are safest when you follow. This kind of love often comes wrapped in concern. Warnings replace conversations. Instructions replace curiosity. Questions are interpreted as disobedience rather than growth. And slowly, the emotional environment becomes heavy. You feel watched even when no one is there. You feel guilty for wanting space. You feel anxious for desiring something different. And the most damaging part is this. You believe the heaviness is your fault. You tell yourself you are ungrateful, sensitive, or difficult because everyone around you insists that what you are receiving is love. But love does not leave you chronically tense. Love does not make your body brace itself before every interaction. Love does not require you to shrink so others can feel secure. When love is real, it offers reassurance, not constant correction. It allows you to stand upright, not remain small. If the presence of care consistently makes you feel inadequate, fearful, or unseen, then something is deeply misaligned, no matter how noble the intentions may appear. Many people raised in such environments grow into adults who look calm on the outside, but are exhausted on the inside. They become highly responsible, overly accommodating, and deeply self-critical. They learn to read moods, anticipate reactions, and adjust themselves to keep peace. This is not maturity. This is survival. It is what happens when love is conditional and emotional safety is uncertain. You become skilled at carrying weight that was never meant to be yours. And because this dynamic was learned early, it feels normal. That is the most dangerous part. You may enter friendships, workplaces, and relationships where heaviness follows you because familiarity feels like comfort, even when it hurts. You may confuse intensity with intimacy, control with care, pressure with purpose. And until you become aware, you may spend years trying to earn a sense of peace that was never designed to be earned in the first place. Awareness begins when you ask a simple but uncomfortable question. Why does love feel like effort instead of refuge? Why does being cared for make you feel tense instead of calm? Why does guidance feel like judgment? These questions are not acts of betrayal, they are acts of clarity. And clarity is not destructive, it is corrective. Understanding this does not mean rejecting your family or rewriting history with bitterness. It means naming reality honestly. It means recognizing that good intentions do not always produce healthy outcomes, and that love, when mixed with fear, insecurity, or control, can quietly become something else entirely. You are allowed to acknowledge that. You are allowed to say, even silently, "This was heavy for me." Because the truth is simple and powerful. Love that is real feels safe, even when it is firm. It feels supportive, even when it sets boundaries. It does not demand constant self-sacrifice to prove loyalty. And once you learn to recognize the difference between love that lifts and love that weighs you down, you take the first step toward emotional freedom, not through rebellion, but through understanding. This is where the journey begins, not with anger, not with accusation, but with the courage to admit that what felt like love may have carried a hidden cost, and that you no longer have to carry it forward. Loyalty that costs you your voice. There is a form of loyalty that is praised loudly in families but paid for quietly by the individual. It is the kind of loyalty that asks you to stay silent when something feels wrong, to nod when you disagree, to swallow words that are truthful but inconvenient. From an early age, this loyalty is presented as virtue. You are told that good children do not question, that respect means compliance, that harmony matters more than honesty. And slowly, without realizing it, you learn that your voice is dangerous. Not because it is unkind, but because it disrupts the order others depend on. At first, the silence seems harmless. You stay quiet to avoid tension. You agree to keep peace. You tell yourself that speaking up is unnecessary, that your feelings can wait, that others matter more in this moment. But silence, when repeated often enough, becomes a habit, and habit becomes identity. You begin to define yourself as the one who understands, the one who adjusts, the one who does not cause problems. Inside, however, something begins to shrink. Your thoughts remain active, but your expression becomes cautious. Your emotions remain strong, but your words grow careful. Over time, you no longer know whether you are choosing silence or whether silence has chosen you. This type of loyalty is often rewarded on the surface. You may be called mature, respectful, well-mannered. You may be trusted with responsibility while being denied emotional freedom. Yet the cost is subtle and severe. Each time you hold back your truth to preserve approval, you teach yourself that your inner experience is less important than external harmony. You learn that belonging requires erasure, and that lesson, once learned, does not stay confined to childhood. It follows you into adulthood, shaping how you communicate, how you disagree, and how you value yourself. When loyalty costs you your voice, it also distorts your sense of self. You become skilled at saying what is acceptable rather than what is real. You measure every word before releasing it, not for clarity, but for safety. You may feel anxious when expressing opinions, guilty when setting boundaries, and uneasy when being direct. Not because you lack confidence, but because your nervous system was trained to associate honesty with consequence. The danger was never in your words. It was in the reaction you were conditioned to fear. And perhaps the most painful part is this. You may begin to defend the very silence that harms you. You tell yourself that speaking up would be selfish, disrespectful, or unnecessary. You minimize your needs while amplifying your duties. You mistake endurance for strength, but true strength does not require the disappearance of your voice. It requires the integration of it. A family environment that demands unquestioned loyalty often fears autonomy more than conflict. Because a voice that speaks clearly cannot be controlled easily, a person who names their truth disrupts unspoken agreements. And so silence is encouraged, not through force, but through expectation. You are not told directly to disappear, you are simply rewarded when you do. As adults, many people raised in this dynamic struggle to identify what they want. Decision-making feels heavy, self-expression feels risky. Even when opportunities arise to speak freely, something inside hesitates. The voice that was suppressed does not vanish, it waits. It shows up as anxiety, frustration, or emotional exhaustion. It shows up in relationships where you feel unseen, and in moments where you leave conversations feeling unheard, even though you were present. Reclaiming your voice does not mean becoming loud or confrontational. It means becoming honest with yourself first. It means acknowledging that loyalty should not require self-betrayal, that respect is not silence, and that love which cannot tolerate your truth is not strengthened by your obedience. You are allowed to speak without rehearsing your worth. You are allowed to express disagreement without fearing abandonment. You are allowed to exist fully, not conditionally. Finding your voice is not an act of disloyalty, it is an act of self-recognition. And when you begin to speak, even quietly, even imperfectly, something profound happens. The weight you have carried begins to lift, the internal conflict softens. You realize that your voice was never the problem. The problem was the environment that could not hold it. This keynote is not a call to confrontation, it is a call to restoration, because the voice you silence to survive is the same voice you need to live. Care that comes with conditions. There is a subtle kind of harm that does not announce itself through cruelty or rejection, but through affection that must be earned. It appears as warmth that arrives only when expectations are met, approval that follows obedience, and closeness that disappears the moment you step outside invisible rules. In such environments, care is present, but it is not steady. It fluctuates, and because it comes from family, it is rarely questioned. You are taught early that love is something you qualify for, not something you are entitled to, and so you learn to perform, to adapt, to anticipate, just to remain emotionally connected. At first, the conditions seem reasonable. Be respectful, be grateful, be agreeable, be successful, be quiet, be strong. Each requirement appears harmless on its own, but together they form a silent contract. You are worthy when you comply. When you do what is expected, care flows easily. When you don't, it retreats, sometimes openly, sometimes quietly. No explanation is offered, only distance. And distance, when it comes from those you depend on, is powerful. It teaches quickly. Over time, you begin to monitor yourself constantly. You measure your words, your reactions, even your feelings. You learn which parts of you are welcomed and which are inconvenient. The unacceptable parts are hidden, suppressed, or reshaped. This is not growth, it is adaptation. And while adaptation helps you survive, it slowly disconnects you from your authentic self. You become skilled at being who you are needed to be, but uncertain about who you actually are. Conditional care creates a dangerous belief that love can be lost at any moment. This belief does not stay in the past. It travels with you into adulthood, shaping your relationships and your self-worth. You may feel compelled to prove your value constantly. You may overgive, overachieve, or overexplain. You may feel uneasy when things are calm, as though acceptance must be followed by evaluation. Peace feels temporary, security feels fragile. And perhaps the most confusing part is that no one ever says they are withholding love, it is simply implied. Conversations grow shorter, warmth fades, attention shifts. You are left to connect the dots alone. And because you were never taught that love can be unconditional, you assume the absence of care is your fault. You ask yourself what you did wrong, what you should fix, who you need to become to restore closeness. This internal questioning becomes relentless. When care is conditional, self-worth becomes conditional too. You begin to value yourself based on usefulness rather than humanity. You feel deserving only when you are helpful, successful, or compliant. Rest feels undeserved. Boundaries feel risky. Saying no feels like rejection waiting to happen, and so you continue, giving, adjusting, striving, hoping one day the conditions will be lifted, hoping one day you will finally be enough. But conditional care does not disappear when demands are met. It evolves. The goalpost moves. What once earned approval becomes expected, and the cycle continues, leaving you emotionally exhausted and perpetually unsure of where you stand. This is not because you are failing. It is because the system was never designed to give you rest, only control through uncertainty. Recognizing conditional care is not about assigning blame. It is about reclaiming truth. Love that is real does not disappear when you express discomfort. Care that is healthy does not require you to abandon parts of yourself to remain connected. Guidance does not need conditions to be effective, and affection does not need performance to be sincere. Breaking free from conditional care begins internally. It starts when you stop negotiating your worth, when you allow yourself to be imperfect without punishment, when you give yourself the consistency you were denied. This does not require confrontation, it requires clarity. You are allowed to be loved without earning it. You are allowed to exist without proving your value. And the moment you realize that care tied to conditions is not care at all, but control softened by affection, is the moment you step out of the cycle. This keynote is not about rejecting family. It is about releasing a belief that never served you, because love that must be earned is not love that sustains, and you were never meant to live under constant evaluation. The fear they call protection. There is a particular kind of fear that enters a person's life disguised as care. It does not arrive as threat or punishment, but as warning. It speaks in cautious tones, wrapped in concern, repeating phrases meant to sound wise and responsible. It tells you the world is dangerous, that mistakes are costly, that independence is risky. And because these messages come from those who claim to love you, they are rarely challenged. Over time, fear is no longer recognized as fear. It is renamed protection. In families where protection is driven by anxiety rather than trust, limits are set not to guide, but to restrict. Curiosity is met with caution. Confidence is softened with doubt. Courage is tempered with reminders of what could go wrong. You are not encouraged to explore. You are advised to stay close. Not because you are incapable, but because someone else is afraid of what might happen if you step beyond what they can control. And slowly, their fear becomes your internal voice. At first, these warnings feel helpful. You believe they are preparing you for reality. But protection that is rooted in fear does not strengthen you. It conditions you. It trains your nervous system to anticipate danger even in safe moments. You begin to second-guess decisions before you make them. You imagine failure before action. You hesitate not because you lack ability, but because confidence was always followed by caution. The message becomes clear. Safety exists only in limitation. This kind of protection rarely appears harsh. It often sounds reasonable, even loving. It asks you to be careful, to think again, to stay within familiar boundaries. But over time, it does something damaging. It replaces trust with dependence. Instead of learning how to navigate challenges, you learn how to avoid them. Instead of building resilience, you build restraint. The outside world begins to feel overwhelming, not because it is, but because you were never allowed to face it fully. Fear-based protection also reshapes identity. You may come to see yourself as fragile, incapable, or unprepared, not because this is true, but because you were constantly reminded of what you might lose if you tried. Risk was framed as recklessness, independence was framed as danger, and safety became synonymous with obedience. In such an environment, confidence does not develop naturally, it must be fought for later. As an adult, this conditioning shows up quietly. You may delay decisions, avoid opportunities, or stay in situations that limit you simply because they feel familiar. You may crave reassurance before acting, approval before moving forward. The fear you carry does not always feel like fear. It feels like responsibility. It feels like caution, but beneath it lies a learned belief. If I move too far, something bad will happen. What makes this dynamic especially difficult is that it often comes with genuine concern. The people who instilled this fear may truly believe they were protecting you, and that makes it harder to question. But intention does not erase impact, and protection that weakens your ability to trust yourself is not protection. It is containment. Real protection prepares you, not paralyzes you. It teaches you how to assess risk, not how to avoid life. It offers guidance without removing agency. It builds confidence alongside caution. When protection is healthy, it slowly steps back as you grow. When it is driven by fear, it tightens its grip. Releasing fear disguised as protection does not require defiance. It requires discernment. It means learning to separate caution from control, concern from limitation. It means recognizing that fear passed down to you was never yours to carry. You are allowed to be careful without being confined. You are allowed to be aware without being afraid. This keynote is about reclaiming trust. Trust in your judgment, your resilience, your ability to adapt. Because life cannot be lived fully from behind constant warning, and safety that costs you courage is not safety at all. When you stop mistaking fear for love, you begin to move freely, not recklessly but confidently. And that is the kind of protection that truly lasts. Breaking the spell without breaking yourself. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply internal, when you realize that the patterns you inherited no longer fit the life you are trying to live. It is not a moment of anger. It is a moment of clarity. You begin to see that what shaped you was not always chosen by you, and that understanding this truth does not require blame or rejection. It requires awareness, because the most powerful change does not begin with confrontation. It begins with consciousness. For many, the idea of breaking away from unhealthy family dynamics feels dangerous. You may fear being labeled ungrateful, distant, or disloyal. You may worry that choosing yourself will cost you connection. And so you stay quiet, hoping things will change on their own. But growth rarely announces itself politely. It asks for honesty. And honesty, when practiced gently, does not destroy bonds. It reveals which ones are real. Breaking the spell does not mean cutting people off or rewriting your history with bitterness. It means stepping out of emotional roles that were assigned to you without your consent. The fixer, the peacemaker, the obedient one, the responsible one. These roles may have helped the system function, but they may have cost you your authenticity. Letting go of them is not betrayal, it is balance. The most important shift happens internally. You stop seeking permission to exist as you are. You stop negotiating your worth through compliance. You stop measuring love by how much you sacrifice. Instead, you begin to offer yourself the stability you were taught to earn. You learn to sit with discomfort without rushing to fix it. You allow others to feel what they feel without making it your responsibility to manage. This is where many people struggle, because stepping back feels like abandonment, both to others and to yourself. But distance is not rejection. Space is not cruelty, and boundaries are not punishment. They are clarity made visible. When you create emotional boundaries, you are not building walls. You are defining where you end and others begin. Breaking the spell also means allowing disappointment to exist without panic. Not everyone will understand your growth. Not everyone will welcome your change. Some will miss the version of you that made things easier for them. That does not make your growth wrong. It makes it disruptive to patterns that depended on your silence. One of the hardest lessons is learning that peace does not come from fixing others. It comes from stabilizing yourself. You cannot heal family dynamics by erasing yourself. You cannot earn freedom through endless patience, and you cannot outgrow emotional patterns while remaining trapped inside them. Change requires movement, even if that movement is quiet. This keynote is about choosing yourself without cruelty, about growth without hostility, about strength without hardness. You do not need to announce your healing. You do not need to justify your boundaries. You do not need to convince anyone of your truth. Living it is enough. As you break the spell, you may feel guilt. Let it pass. Guilt is often the echo of old conditioning, not evidence of wrongdoing. You may feel fear. Let it pass too. Fear fades when action replaces hesitation. What remains is clarity, and clarity is calm. You are not responsible for maintaining systems that harm you. You are responsible for protecting the life you are building. And when you choose yourself with quiet conviction, something remarkable happens. The weight lifts, the noise softens, the confusion clears. Breaking the spell does not mean you stop loving. It means you stop losing yourself in the process. And that is not selfishness. That is survival refined into wisdom. This is not an ending. It is a return to yourself.